Hello, and welcome to Basic HIPAA Training for Covered Entities. My name is Abner Weintraub, and I'll be your instructor for this course. I've been involved with HIPAA for many years, and I've seen it from many sides. I've consulted to business associates and covered entities of every type. I've taught HIPAA to thousands, and I've had the honor of being an expert witness in HIPAA-related legal cases. And throughout all those experiences, I've learned that HIPAA provides tremendous benefits to the healthcare industry, to the American people, and to you. Before we get started, let's take a quick look at how this course is organized. In Section 1, Understanding HIPAA, you'll learn what HIPAA is and what it's all about. First up in Section 1 is HIPAA Basics. Then I'll talk a bit about how HIPAA changed in 2013 with the final rule. We'll cover important HIPAA terms you need to know. We'll look at HIPAA's history, HIPAA yesterday, today, and tomorrow. I'll talk about privacy rule basics. We'll cover HIPAA compliance requirements. You'll learn why HIPAA is needed in the first place. Then I'll be covering security rule basics. We'll learn about patient rights under HIPAA. And finally, in Section 1, I'll be covering penalties for HIPAA violations. In Section 2, Working with HIPAA, you'll learn how to work safely under HIPAA while protecting confidential patient data and avoiding HIPAA violations. First up in Section 2 is how HIPAA affects you and your job. We'll look at how common HIPAA violations are created. I'll be talking about the HIPAA officer. We'll look at your policies and HIPAA and why they're so important. We'll cover disclosure, do's and don'ts. We'll look at emergencies and HIPAA. We'll cover 3 keys to HIPAA success. And I'll be showing you additional sources for more HIPAA information. We'll wrap up Section 2 with a course conclusion. HIPAA is the main medical privacy law in the United States. HIPAA law applies in all of the U.S. and its territories, such as Puerto Rico, Guam, the Virgin Islands, American Samoa, and the Northern Mariana Islands as well. Several different HIPAA rules are part of HIPAA law. The 2 most important rules for HIPAA entities are the privacy rule and the security rule. The privacy rule requires strong protections for patients' personal and confidential health information and gives patients certain specific rights over their health information. The security rule protects electronic forms of patient information on computers and other electronic devices. It covers computers, networks, and any other electronic systems that handle or store patient data, even smartphones and other portable devices. HIPAA has 5 overall objectives. 1, to make health insurance more portable, so people can more easily keep their health insurance when they change jobs. 2, reduce healthcare fraud, which wastes 20 to 30% of every dollar spent on healthcare today. 3, improve the efficiency of health insurance enrollments, claims, payments, and other transactions. 4, protect personal medical information. And 5, gather statistical data about diseases. It's important to remember that wherever there's patient information, HIPAA is there. HIPAA protects all individually identifiable patient information, no matter what form it's in or where it's located. HIPAA covers paper records, electronic records, telephone, email, computers, and other systems. It doesn't matter if an entity creates or receives it, or whether it's new or old, if something contains information about a person's health, past, present, or future, it's protected by HIPAA. HIPAA gives all patients specific rights over their medical information. But HIPAA is about the business of healthcare, not the practice of medicine. And while HIPAA affects almost everything in healthcare, it's not about the practice of medicine. There are no medical or clinical requirements in HIPAA dealing with specific diseases, treatments, or procedures. Instead, HIPAA is about the business of healthcare and the protection of personal medical information. HIPAA created many new terms and phrases. I'll be covering only the most important HIPAA terms you need to know. First, covered entity, abbreviated CE. This is any entity that is covered by the HIPAA regulations and who must comply with HIPAA. There are several types of covered entities, including medical providers, such as medical practices, clinics, hospitals, and nursing homes. Health plans are also covered entities. These are health insurance plans and providers. And the third category are clearinghouses. These are firms that translate HIPAA transactions, like claims, from one format to another. It's important to note that nearly all medical providers are covered entities and must comply with HIPAA. Protected health information, abbreviated PHI. This is patient information that is protected by HIPAA law. PHI is health information that's individually identifiable. It can be created or received, and it can be in any form, written, recorded, printed, spoken, digital, or on paper. PHI includes medical records and medical billing records. Business associate, abbreviated BA. A business associate is a person or a firm not part of a covered entity's own workforce, who does work or provides services for a covered entity or another business associate, and who uses PHI in that work. This is patient data. Until recently, BAs were not covered directly under HIPAA law, and they could not be prosecuted for HIPAA violations. But because of the HIPAA final rule, beginning in 2013, business associates and even their subcontractors must now comply with nearly all of HIPAA. Business associates can now also be prosecuted and penalized for HIPAA violations, just like covered entities. Under the 2013 HIPAA final rule, business associates must now ensure that all of their own subcontractors and vendors who are exposed to confidential patient data also meet the HIPAA requirements. Authorization, abbreviated as auth, sometimes called a release. This is a patient consent or permission form that is clearly defined in HIPAA law. Under HIPAA, a covered entity is not allowed to use or release protected health information, PHI, except 1, as the HIPAA privacy rule permits or requires, or 2, as the patient or their legal representative authorizes in writing with a valid authorization. To be valid under HIPAA law, authorizations must contain certain specific terms and statements. They must be written in plain language, and providers must give the person, who is usually the patient, who signed the authorization, a copy if they ask for one. Disclose. To disclose is to give out or release protected health information. Disclosures can be lawful and appropriate, like disclosures for treatment, payment, and healthcare operations. Disclosures can also be unlawful, and an unlawful disclosure is a HIPAA violation. Electronic PHI, abbreviated ePHI. This is protected health information in electronic or digital form. PHI on a computer, a CD, magnetic tape, a hard drive, or a network is PHI. Any patient data on smartphones and other portable devices is also ePHI and must be protected. Minimum Necessary Rule, abbreviated MNR. The Minimum Necessary Rule says that for any use, request, or disclosure of PHI, only the minimum necessary information that is actually needed should be used or disclosed. Covered entities and business associates must make reasonable efforts to limit the information used or disclosed to the minimum necessary. The minimum necessary rule does not apply in 4 particular situations. 1. Uses or disclosures for treatment. 2. Disclosures made directly to a patient of their own PHI or that of their minor children. 3. Disclosures based on a valid authorization. And 4. Disclosures that are required by law. Note that disclosures that are merely permitted by law, but not required by law, must also be kept to the minimum necessary. All other uses and disclosures of PHI should be kept to the minimum necessary whenever possible. Notice of Privacy Practices, abbreviated NPP. The Notice of Privacy Practices is a document required by HIPAA that covered entities must give to all their patients at least once. You may have received one yourself the last time you visited a doctor. The NPP tells patients how their protected health information may be used or disclosed. It also tells patients about their HIPAA rights and how to use them. Finally, the NPP tells patients how to file a HIPAA complaint if they believe their privacy has been violated, or if they believe a covered entity has otherwise violated HIPAA. Treatment, Payment, and Healthcare Operations, abbreviated TPO. These are 3 routine categories of PHI uses and disclosures that covered entities can make, with some limitations, with no patient authorization required. A covered entity can use or disclose PHI for its own treatment, payment, and healthcare operations without an authorization. A covered entity also may disclose PHI for the treatment activities of another provider if both CEs have a relationship with the patient, past, present, or future, and if the protected health information is about that patient. Medical entities first began complying with HIPAA in April 2003, when HIPAA's privacy rule became effective. Since then, there have been very few major changes to HIPAA until fairly recently. The HITECH Act changed HIPAA in 2009 and 2010. HITECH changes to HIPAA included tougher HIPAA enforcement and higher fines for violations, mandatory investigations for willful neglect violations, mandatory fines for willful neglect violations. Patients must be notified when their personal health data is lost, stolen, or compromised. HIPAA began to apply to electronic health records due to the HITECH Act. Vendors to healthcare providers had to begin complying with certain parts of HIPAA. In 2013, the HIPAA Final Rule, also known as the Omnibus Rule, was enacted and made many important changes to HIPAA. The Final Rule went into effect on March 26, 2013, and had a compliance deadline of September 23, 2013. Changes to HIPAA from the final rule included changes to the notice of privacy practices that medical providers must give to all their patients, new breach notification rules and requirements, improved patient privacy protections and expanded patient rights, expanded rules for electronic health records, dramatic changes to how business associates and their subcontractors must comply with HIPAA, and tougher penalties and investigations for violations of HIPAA rules. The future of HIPAA is wide open. No new major changes are planned at this time, but incremental changes are expected over the next few years. We can certainly expect that HIPAA enforcement and audits will ramp up. The main purpose of HIPAA's privacy rule is to protect people's personal, private health information, while still allowing the flow of information needed to deliver healthcare services. HIPAA strikes a balance that allows some routine uses of patient information without authorizations, while still protecting people's privacy. HIPAA is flexible and scalable, so different sizes and types of covered entities and business associates can comply with it. The privacy rule restricts PHI uses and disclosures. In general, HIPAA entities may not use or disclose PHI except 1. As the privacy rule permits or requires, or 2. As a patient or their legal representative authorizes with a valid authorization. To be HIPAA compliant means that a covered entity or a business associate is doing everything that HIPAA requires. Some of HIPAA's compliance requirements include creating privacy policies and procedures, assigning a HIPAA officer, which is optional for business associates, training the workforce on HIPAA and the entity's own policies, providing data safeguards, addressing privacy complaints, and forbidding retaliation for filing a HIPAA complaint or assisting with a HIPAA investigation, keeping and retaining required documentation. Note that failure to fully comply with all of HIPAA's requirements is a HIPAA violation. In fact, each compliance requirement that an entity fails to comply with is a separate HIPAA violation. This means that fines for HIPAA non-compliance can add up to large amounts very quickly. HIPAA is needed for two main reasons. Besides HIPAA's 5 long-term objectives that we mentioned back in HIPAA Basics, there are 2 general reasons why HIPAA was and is needed. 1, to protect personal privacy. Privacy is an essential right in America that people care very strongly about. Medical privacy is especially important to people. And number 2, to prevent crime. Patient records have value to criminals who use stolen records for identity theft and fraud. Identity theft is a huge and growing problem today, and victims can have their money, credit, and reputation stolen very quickly. Identity theft usually begins with criminals getting personal information from someone's medical records, wallet, or even a loan application. Criminals can then make purchases, obtain credit, and commit crimes, all in the other person's name. The HIPAA security rule protects ePHI, electronic PHI. ePHI includes all protected health information on computers, networks, the internet, and other electronic devices. This also includes PHI on smartphones and other such portable devices. Regardless of your job, you must protect all types of PHI as you use, transmit, or handle it. Covered entities and business associates must do the following under HIPAA's security rule. They must ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of EPHI. They must protect EPHI against reasonably anticipated threats, and they must protect EPHI against uses or disclosures that are not permitted by HIPAA. Here are some tips for safe computing and protecting EPHI. Never access medical or billing records of family, friends, or others unless you are authorized to do so. This includes your own medical and billing records too. Use strong passwords and timed screensavers on all computers and workstations. Don't use a computer or access any patient data using someone else's password. And please don't give your password to others. Don't leave files containing EPHI open when you walk away from them. Scan for viruses, spyware, and other threats before installing new data or programs. Use encryption for emailing EPHI or don't email it. Always close, file, lock, shred, or properly dispose of EPHI when you are done with it. Beware of hackers and scammers impersonating authorized staff. Verify identities before giving anyone access to PHI. HIPAA gives patients specific rights to access and control their medical information. HIPAA gives all patients, including you, the following rights. The right to receive a Notice of Privacy Practices, the NPP. HIPAA requires covered entities to provide a copy to every patient. The right to a copy of one's own protected health information. This allows patients to get a copy of their own medical records from their medical providers. Parents and legal guardians are also entitled to get copies of their minor children's PHI. The right to request PHI amendments. This allows patients to request an amendment, a written note, to be added to their medical record. Covered entities do not have to agree to these requests, but may if the amendment is reasonable. Covered entities may refuse to add an amendment for two reasons. One, if the data in the record is already correct, or two, if someone else originated the data that's in the record. The right to restrict disclosures to others. This right allows a patient to name particular people or entities whom they do not want to receive their medical information. Covered entities must agree to these requests. Once agreed to, covered entities must abide by such restrictions consistently. Patients cannot request disclosure restrictions that are required by law, such as responding to certain diseases or evidence of crimes. Starting in 2013, HIPAA also lets patients restrict disclosures to their health insurer about treatments or services the patient or family member or friend has paid for in full. The right to receive PHI by alternate means. This right allows patients to ask providers to contact them at an alternate phone number or address. Two examples are when a patient asks that their mail be sent directly to a post office box and not to their home, or when a patient requests that phone calls go to the patient's cell phone and not to their home or work numbers. The right to an accounting of PHI disclosures. Under HIPAA, some PHI disclosures must be recorded in a log, called a disclosure accounting, which shows the date, time, purpose, what was released, who released it, and who received it. HIPAA lets patients get a copy of the disclosure accounting. Such reports can go back a maximum of 6 years. The right to file a privacy complaint. Patients may file a written complaint either with the covered entity where a problem happened or with the OCR, the HIPAA Enforcement Authority. Retaliation against a patient for filing a complaint is not permitted. Covered entities must respond to complaints within a reasonable time and must try to reduce any harmful effects created by a violation. Note that anyone can file a HIPAA complaint, not just patients. The right to receive or send a digital copy of PHI in electronic health records. For providers who use electronic health records, or EHRs, patients can now get a digital copy of their medical records. The copies may be on disk, CD-ROM, DVD, or a memory stick. Patients can now also have their digital copies of their records sent to any third party they specify in writing and approve with their signature. Penalties for HIPAA violations can be severe. HIPAA is enforced by the Office for Civil Rights, abbreviated OCR, which is a part of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. HIPAA penalties depend on what crime was committed and what the violator did, if anything, to correct the violation. If a violation is committed and the violator corrects the problem on his own, credit is given for that. If a violation is committed and the person does not correct the problem, ignores the violation, or doesn't care, this is also considered. Whether a violation was committed intentionally or accidentally is also important when penalties are determined. The minimum fine for a minor HIPAA violation is $100. But the maximum fine for a serious HIPAA violation is $50,000 per single violation, with a $1.5 million maximum per year. Criminal HIPAA violations can also include prison sentences of up to 10 years for each violation. In 2013, the final rule made HIPAA enforcement and penalties even stricter, with mandatory investigations of all cases where willful neglect is involved. Also, the OCR's previous policy of resolving HIPAA violations using informal means, meaning no financial penalties, is no longer in effect. HIPAA enforcement is now serious business. And now, let's briefly review what we've learned in Section 1, Understanding HIPAA. We covered HIPAA basics, including the privacy rule and security rule, and I pointed out that these are the two most important parts of HIPAA for business associates and covered entities. We learned how HIPAA changed in 2013 with the final rule, including tougher enforcement and penalties. We covered the HIPAA terms you need to know. We looked at the history of HIPAA, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. We looked at privacy rule basics, HIPAA compliance, and why HIPAA is needed in the first place. I discussed security rule basics and security rule compliance. We looked at patient rights under HIPAA, and those are your rights too. We looked at penalties for HIPAA violations, which can be severe. In our next section, Section 2, we'll learn about working with HIPAA. No matter what you do in healthcare, HIPAA affects you and your job. As someone who treats patients or who handles patient data, HIPAA requires you to do two things on a daily basis. One, protect PHI to the best of your ability. And two, follow your employer's policies carefully and consistently. Even if you think your employer's policies are wrong, as an employee, you are still required to follow them. Even if you think your policies conflict with HIPAA, follow your employer's policies faithfully and not your interpretation of HIPAA. First and foremost, learn and follow your own policies to the best of your ability. They are designed to include all of HIPAA's requirements and much more. HIPAA violations can happen in any organization. Some violations happen by accident or through carelessness. Others happen when someone steals PHI for personal or financial reasons. Regardless of how they are created, all HIPAA violations pose a serious threat. Let's look at the most common ways HIPAA violations are created. In some violations, employees discuss a patient's condition in an elevator, restaurant, parking lot, or other public place and are overheard by someone who knows the patient. In other violations, unshredded PHI is retrieved from a dumpster and used for identity theft or fraud. Curious employees sometimes browse medical records of family members, friends, celebrities, or other newsworthy patients. In some cases, employees are tricked by hackers or other criminals into disclosing PHI. Improperly trained or untrained employees can be careless with PHI and create a violation. Or terminated employees may gain access to company computers and steal or compromise PHI. In some violations, insiders with personal or financial problems take advantage of their employee access to steal PHI. Please note that compliance with HIPAA and handling PHI carefully will help prevent many types of common violations from happening. And preventing HIPAA violations is the best approach. While non-compliance with HIPAA is a violation, violations where PHI is wrongfully disclosed are much more serious than HIPAA non-compliance. It's always easier and less costly to prevent violations than to clean up the damages that result from them. Financial damages from violations can be huge, but the damage to a covered entity or business associate's reputation from a breach or violation is often more costly than the financial damages that result. The HIPAA officer is the HIPAA leader in an organization. The HIPAA officer is the person responsible for HIPAA activities and HIPAA compliance. Every covered entity must designate someone as a privacy official, called the HIPAA privacy officer or just the HIPAA officer. Some larger organizations have a separate privacy officer and security officer, but this is not required. In some entities, the HIPAA officer is also the compliance officer for all compliance needs, not just HIPAA. Under the HIPAA regulations, the HIPAA officer must be an individual, not a committee or group. Covered entities must also designate a contact person to receive privacy complaints. The HIPAA officer can also be the contact person for complaints. Note that business associates are not required to designate a HIPAA officer, but some do anyway as a best practice rather than a mandatory requirement. The HIPAA officer takes responsibility for a covered entity's overall HIPAA activities and compliance. Who is the HIPAA officer in your organization? If you don't know, be sure you find out. You should write down their name, phone number, and email address in case you have questions or need help with HIPAA. For business associates, you should know the HIPAA officer at each of the covered entities that you do business with. On the job, your employer's policies are even more important than HIPAA. Policies are a HIPAA requirement because employees are not required or expected to read the HIPAA law or regulations themselves. Policies are supposed to translate the complexities of HIPAA into clear guidance for workers to do their jobs correctly. Policies include more than HIPAA. Policies must also include state law requirements, other laws requiring compliance, corporate priorities, and requirements from accrediting organizations like JCAHO and others. All those different, sometimes conflicting requirements must be combined into clear policies that tell the workforce what's allowed and what's not. You must follow your own policies and procedures first and foremost. There should not be any conflicts between HIPAA and your own policies and procedures, but such conflicts are possible. In any case, you should always follow your own policies and procedures above HIPAA. If you believe your entity's policies conflict or disagree with HIPAA, tell your supervisor and let her raise the issue with management. If you do something because HIPAA allows it, but your own policies forbid it, you will have a serious problem. Following HIPAA instead of your own policies can result in discipline and even termination from your job. But if you follow your own employer's policies in good faith, and a HIPAA violation is somehow created, you have little to fear from HIPAA. HIPAA regulations and the HIPAA Enforcement Agency, the OCR, are very forgiving in cases where a person acted in good faith and can show they had no intention of doing wrong. PHI disclosures are serious business, and they must be made carefully. Recall that disclosures for treatment, payment, and healthcare operations do not need an authorization. But for all other disclosures, you have 4 basic disclosure choices. 1, you can get an authorization from the patient the PHI is about, and then release the PHI. 2, you can de-identify the PHI so that it's no longer individually identifiable and is no longer protected by HIPAA. Then you can release the de-identified data. Option 3, if the disclosure is for research, public health, or healthcare operations, you can create what's known as a limited data set from the protected health information and get a data use agreement signed, and then you may release the data. And finally, option 4, do not make the disclosure. Remember, disclosures for treatment purposes and those made to the person who the records are about do not need an authorization or minimum necessary filtering. In other words, when you're giving someone their own records, or for treatment purposes, you can lawfully provide the entire medical record, including parts from other providers. HIPAA absolutely permits this. PHI disclosures are mandatory in only 3 situations. Nearly all disclosures under HIPAA are permitted rather than required. The 3 situations when covered entities must disclose protected health information are: 1, when the PHI is about the person who is asking for it. 2, when the disclosure is required, not merely permitted, by law. And 3, when the Secretary of Health and Human Services or the OCR, officially requests PHI for an investigation. Remember, when a patient requests a copy of their own PHI, you must provide it to them. You should verify their identity according to your own policies and procedures, and you may charge a reasonable fee within HIPAA boundaries and state law. But you are required by law to provide patients with their own records when they request them in writing. Covered entities may disclose PHI without an authorization for treatment, payment, and healthcare operations, TPO purposes. HIPAA's minimum necessary standard should be applied to all disclosures except disclosures for treatment, disclosures to a patient of their own PHI or that of their minor children, disclosures based on a valid authorization, disclosures to HHS, the OCR, for investigations, reviews, or HIPAA enforcement purposes, disclosures that are required by law, not just permitted by law, and limited disclosures to family and friends are permitted without an authorization. If the patient is present, a provider may discuss the patient's health information with a family member, friend, or other person if the patient agrees or when given the opportunity if the patient does not object. A provider may also share information with these persons if he or she decides the patient does not object. Providers may share or discuss only the information that the person involved needs to know about the patient's care or payment for care. If the patient is not present or is incapacitated, a provider may still share the patient's information with family, friends, or others as long as the provider determines that it's in the best interest of the patient. When someone other than a friend or family member is involved, the provider must be reasonably sure that the patient asked that person to be involved in his or her care or payment for care. The provider may discuss, once again, only the information that the person involved needs to know about the patient's care or payment. Note that providers are not required to document the patient's decision under HIPAA law. HIPAA doesn't require that a provider document the patient's agreement or lack of objection. However, a provider is free to document the patient's agreement or lack of objection in writing. Typically, this would be done in the medical record. Covered entities and business associates are expected to comply with HIPAA in a wide variety of situations. These include everything from routine patient care to business operations to normal emergency room operations. However, if you are ever in a situation where you must choose between privacy and a patient's life, you must always put the patient's safety and well-being ahead of HIPAA. After the emergency is over, you may have to fill out a report, document what happened, or reconstruct the appropriate records. But HIPAA will not penalize you for putting patient safety ahead of HIPAA, as long as you act in good faith. HIPAA also allows covered entities and business associates to temporarily ignore HIPAA's requirements in the case of genuine and declared national emergencies. Such emergencies include national security emergencies, like nuclear or biological attacks or war, and natural disasters, like extreme floods, storms, earthquakes, or major tornadoes. Education is the most important key to HIPAA success. Leaders must understand HIPAA to reach full HIPAA compliance and to avoid violations. HIPAA officers need to know as much as possible about HIPAA, state law, and other related laws. Workers at every level need to understand the risks to PHI and how to protect it. The IT department needs to know how to protect ePHI on computers, networks, and other electronic devices. After HIPAA training, everyone needs to stay aware of HIPAA and protect PHI at all times. The second key to HIPAA success is proper documentation. Be sure you keep HIPAA-related forms and paperwork up to date and well organized. Remember, your paperwork is the only evidence you have of your HIPAA compliance. And the third key to HIPAA success is to understand the value of protected health information to criminals. PHI has a financial value to criminals. To the wrong people, PHI is worth money. In fact, PHI in a person's medical record is very similar to the information people carry in their wallets. And we all know how upset we would be if our own wallet were lost or stolen. Underground markets exist on the internet where people's PHI and other stolen personal information is bought and sold by criminals. And unfortunately, once PHI has been lost or stolen, it's nearly impossible to recover. If you need more information about HIPAA, ask your HIPAA privacy officer or management first. But if you still need additional resources, there are some excellent resources available on the internet. First and foremost is the OCR. This is the official enforcer for the HIPAA privacy and security rules. But in addition to enforcement, the OCR produces a wide range of materials on almost every topic related to HIPAA. Everyone with an interest in HIPAA should be familiar with their website and the educational materials that they make available. Many websites offer access to the HIPAA law and regulations online, including the OCR. But our favorite is a version offered by Ohio law firm Bricker and Eckler. In our opinion, it is the simplest and easiest to navigate, and we highly recommend it. And our third and final resource for additional HIPAA information online is AHIMA, the American Health Information Management Association, abbreviated AHIMA. There are many national associations that concern themselves with HIPAA as well as privacy and security of health data. But the one we recommend for HIPAA information and resources is AHIMA. It was founded in 1928, and AHIMA has a spectacular library and produces some of the best HIPAA newsletters, books, and events. Thank you for joining me for this basic HIPAA training course. Let's review what we've learned. In Section 1, Understanding HIPAA, we covered the basics of HIPAA, including the privacy rule and security rule. We explored how HIPAA changed in 2013 with the final rule. We looked at HIPAA terms that you need to know. I discussed HIPAA's history, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. We looked at the privacy rule basics, as well as HIPAA compliance and the steps required to be compliant. I talked about why HIPAA is needed to prevent crime and protect the privacy of personal medical information. We explored the basics of the security rule, and we discussed patient rights under HIPAA. And finally, in Section 1, Understanding HIPAA, I explained the penalties for HIPAA violations. In Section 2, Working with HIPAA, we looked at how HIPAA affects you and your job. We explored how HIPAA violations are created, and I detailed some of the common ways that HIPAA violations happen. I've talked about the HIPAA officer and the responsibilities taken by the officer. We looked at your policies and HIPAA, and I mentioned that you should follow your own policies first and foremost. We discussed important disclosure do's and don'ts. I covered emergencies and HIPAA. And finally, we covered 3 keys to HIPAA success that you should remember. And afterward, I presented additional sources for more HIPAA information. This concludes HIPAA training for covered entities. Remember, you have a responsibility under HIPAA law to protect PHI and ePHI at all times. Thank you for joining.